As we move into chapter 2, it's worth noting that our common chapter and verse divisions were added well after the text was written. They are useful for locating passages quickly, but unfortunately we run into occasions where the chapter break comes in the middle of a thought. Here is one such example. The seventh day of creation is separated from the other 6 days by our chapter division, even though it's really the conclusion of the creation account. Keeping this in mind, we'll continue to move through one chapter each day, but we'll try to call attention to contextual clues that tell us when a break in thought occurs. Genesis actually has 10 natural breaks, genealogical sections that mark major transitions in the narrative, and the first one occurs right here after the seventh day. Day 7, God rested, but not because he was tired or exhausted, as Isaiah 40 verse 28 would point out, but because he was done. After the labor is complete, then rest can come. And this isn't about God needing a break, it's about God establishing a pattern. Verse 3 tells us that God made the seventh day holy, set it apart, different from the other days. Moses introduces this here because God will later use this make the rest on this day a command for his new nation Israel. The seventh day is unique. Unlike the other 6 days, there's no mention of an evening and morning. Some see this as suggesting that the seventh day actually continues. God is not continuing to create, but he's at rest from creation. Hebrews, which we'll get to later on in the year, will play on the idea of God's rest, which we are invited to join in Hebrews chapter 4. Now Moses zooms in to give us more detail about the creation of humanity. You may notice that verse 5 mentions that no plants were growing yet, which may raise a question since we already read about plants being created on day 3. The Hebrew word for plants is different in chapters 1 and 2. In chapter 1, Moses describes wild vegetation. Here in chapter 2, he's talking about cultivated plants, that is, crops that need someone to tend them. As Moses writes this section, the emphasis here in this chapter is on the origin of man, well, with a little bit more detail. While wild vegetation was present, cultivated plants needed someone to take care of them. So God created man for that purpose and then planted a garden where he could live and work. Moses describes man's creation by saying that we're taken from the dust of the earth. God formed man like a potter shaping clay, but it wasn't until God breathed into man the breath of life that man became a living soul. That breath, that inspiration, is what separates us from the rest of creation. We are dust animated by divine breath. We are both humility and dignity wrapped together. This also tells us something important. Work came before sin entered the world. Adam was placed in the garden to work it and to keep it in verse 15. Work is not a curse. It's part of God's good design. The curse that comes later is what makes work difficult and frustrating, but work itself is a gift, and it gives us purpose. In the Garden of Eden, God caused trees to spring up that were pleasant to look at and good for food in verse 9. Among them were 2 special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now God gives Adam freedom. He says you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but also he gives him a boundary. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. Notice that death isn't presented as something natural or inevitable. Death is the consequence of disobedience. We'll see more about these trees in the next chapter, but for now, notice that God gives both abundance and boundaries, freedoms and limits. This is how God designed life to work. Then God says something that we haven't heard. It is not good. Up until now, everything has been good or very good. But now God identifies something that is not good. It's not good that the man should be alone. Now God brings all the animals to Adam, and Adam names them. But as he does this, it becomes apparent that there is no animal suitable for him. This isn't a failure of creation. This is by design. Adam is made in God's image. The animals are not. Adam needs a companion who is like him, equal to him, someone who shares his nature. So God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and out of it fashions a woman. When Adam wakes up and sees her, he says, "This is at last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." She is also called a helper fit for him in verse 18. But this is not a role of inferiority. The Hebrew word for helper, ezer, is predominantly used of God himself. A helper is not subordinate. It's someone who comes alongside to accomplish what couldn't be done alone. She compliments him in his work, and she compliments him in his life. Verse 24 gives us the foundation for marriage. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. This is likely Moses is adding commentary rather than Adam speaking, but the principle is clear. Marriage involves leaving, that is independence from parents, cleaving, commitment to spouse, and becoming one flesh, unity, physical, emotional, and spiritual. If you've been reading with us since the first of the year, you will remember in Matthew 19 that Jesus quoted this verse when asked about marriage and divorce. Marriage and divorce when he was asked about marriage and divorce, affirming that marriage is God's design from the beginning. One man, one woman for life. Matthew 19. The chapter ends with this beautiful note, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. That's innocence, transparency, no fear, no hiding, no shame. This is how things were meant to be. How long did it last? We don't really know, but tomorrow we'll see the beginning of sin in this world, and everything will change from there. So what can we apply to our lives today from chapter 2? First, rest is part of God's design, not a sign of weakness. God modeled rest on the seventh day, and if the creator of the universe rests, how much more should we? We live in a culture that glorifies busyness and treats rest as laziness, but God built rest into the rhythm of creation. Rest isn't unproductive, it's essential. It's also a recognition that we are not God and that we need to trust Him to provide for us, even if we miss that extra shift of overtime and the money it would bring. Are you resting, or are you running yourself back into the ground from which you came? Second, work is good. It's not a curse. God was given work before He sinned. He was placed into the garden to work it and to keep it. Work isn't the result of sin. Frustration and difficulty in work, however, are. God designed us to be productive, to create, to cultivate, to care for what He's made. Don't despise your work. See it as part of God's good design for your life. As Paul will write in Colossians 3 verse 23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Third, marriage permanence is God's design from the beginning. One man, one woman, leaving their families, committing to each other, becoming one flesh. This is not a cultural construct or an evolving social institution. It's God's design from creation. If you're married, are you honoring that design? Are you leaving? Are you becoming emotionally independent from parents? Are you cleaving? Are you being committed to your spouse above all others? And are you pursuing oneness or unity? If you're not married, are you respecting God's design for marriage in the way in which you live your life? Finally, we are made for relationships. It's not good that man should be alone, God said. God, recognizing Adam's need for companionship, met that need. We're not designed to live in isolation. We need community, fellowship, friendship, both for social relationships and spiritual ones. If you're lonely, don't ignore it, address it. Get involved in your congregation. Build relationships. Isolation is not God's plan for you. Tomorrow, Lord willing, we will see what happens when humanity chooses to obey God's one command. Sin enters the world and everything changes. But even in that tragedy, we'll begin to see God's plan for redemption. With each chapter, we will continue to renew our minds.